All right, what's up, everybody? John the Morgile here, checking in for a new Flat Earth video for you. I hope you do enjoy it. So this one we're going to get into back to the basics, back to Flat Earth basics, the demise of Copernicus. Of late, it's become apparent that most people have heard about the Flat Earth in the modern virtual world of conversation on social media. I remember it wasn't that long ago when the average person off the street would do like a double take if you mentioned the phrase static plane Earth or flat Earth, and you'd need to explain to them, yes, there are actually people alive on the world today who don't believe in NASA or Einsteinian space-time theory, right? And, I can actually relate to that very intimately, as I was exactly the type of person who, when first introduced to the concept of flat Earth, instantly knew that it was the stupidest topic that I'd ever heard of, as I was very confident in my understanding of the heliocentric model, or like the Copernican universe principles, and utterly scoffed at the ridiculous concept of flat Earth. Since it is categorically impossible for a person to be, convinced that the Earth isn't a ball upon their first soiree into the topic, due to a lifetime of programming designed to psychologically supplant the illogical, impossible illusion of a spinning ball Earth into an unshakable core belief module for the entire country, even the entire world. When I personally first heard about flat Earth, I think I totally ignored the concept for at least several months, maybe even over a year. But definitely didn't think about it after initially hearing about flat Earth and scoffing at it. That's all I thought about it. I thought it was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. And then I was hit by a car on my motorcycle. I won't go too much into the details, but I was riding my bike through a green light when a dude pulling out of the adjacent grocery store parking lot was obviously getting a very important text message, for that was the last thing I remember seeing before my face broke his windshield and he nearly run over my head as I rolled into oncoming traffic and my bike smashed into a million pieces right before my eyes. He had run a red light, doing like right on red coming out of the parking lot, and he just didn't see me. I certainly saw him, and I certainly remember seeing him texting when my face hit his windshield. Needless to say, this so-called accident affected me very deeply. I still won't go out in traffic on a motorcycle anymore to this very day. I was extremely nervous to even ride in cars for months after the accident, and to this day my neck and upper back don't function as they once did. I get terrible pains in my lower back, and I've got some nerve damage from the wreck. I was literally in shock, or like going through PTSD for a long time after the accident. That I had a bit of an existential crisis after this accident. Like I very easily could have been killed. And in fact, if it hadn't have been cold and raining that day, I wouldn't have been wearing any safety gear, maybe just a t-shirt. Luckily, it was cold and raining that day, so I had on a full face mask helmet, as well as a leather jacket, and I think 2 pairs of blue jeans. So it could have been way worse. And when you have those sort of near-death experiences, it makes you reevaluate certain elements of your beliefs or certain elements of your life, right? So after the wreck and during this sort of existential crisis, I'm pretty sure the high doses of oxycodone that the doctors prescribed me, coupled with the extra time I had on my hands during recovery from the wreck, had a lot to do with me finally looking into the totally stupid, waste of time topic of flat Earth, strictly to debunk it. Since, again, I've historically been very interested in science, NASA, and distant planets with potential extraterrestrials and all that. Honestly, I don't even think I consciously decided to go out and debunk flat Earth. I think what happened was a video came through my feed on YouTube, and I just decided to watch it instead of clicking past it like I normally would have. And I think I did it just sort of for shits and giggles because I figured it would be like, super easy to debunk flat Earth, given the fact that we all know, that the Earth is a spinning ball flying around in space, of course, right? As far as I was concerned, the concept of flat Earth was categorically incompatible with the natural universe, which I knew was governed by gravity, and figured it would take, all of 10 seconds to listen to what these generic-ass flat earthers had to say, and then cleverly debunk all their points for an easy slam dunk video on YouTube. The problem was, once I actually took the time to listen to what these flat earthers had to say, while there were certainly some circumstantial arguments couched as proofs, I was instantly reminded of certain problems with my existing belief system, which I had sort of brushed under the rug or stored on a shelf in my mind labeled anomalies, or maybe labeled as not enough data to make a cogent conclusion. This is to say, over the years growing up on planet Earth, there were several issues with the Copernican universe, which I, as a deep thinker and a lover of all things science or NASA, had certainly noticed and earmarked as curious or queer, on the shelves of my mind or whatever. So, for example, the fact that we live within a pressurized system here on Earth, and yet infinite space is said to be this super high vacuum adjacent to our pressurized atmosphere at the ambiguous and hypothetical Kármán line.
Now, commence Operation Vacuum Suck. Suck, suck, suck!
Without any sort of barrier separating these two areas. This was always an issue for me, even as a globetard, which I never could seem to settle within the confines of the heliocentric or Copernican universe. Sure, it didn't make sense that we should have such a system in violation of the most basic and obvious laws of physics, but this is science that we're dealing with, so since, all the scientists in the world are on board with the ball, and there's no way science could be wrong, or there's no way NASA could be lying, there must be some logical explanation for the fact that we do indeed live in a pressurized system, about 14.7 pounds per square inch at sea level, and we've all seen footage from NASA where they're clearly floating around in the vacuum of space, so there must be a logical and cogent exception in basic physics which allows for this to work. Again, the problem with the pressurized system of the world being adjacent to the strong vacuum of infinite space. Being honest with myself, I remembered being incredulous about this specific problem with fluid dynamics or thermodynamics, even back in 7th grade science class. Maybe we weren't calling it thermodynamics, but we were discussing how the pressure of the air is what gives objects most of their weight on a scale. Surely gravity was mentioned in the discussion, and I remember asking the teacher something about how the Earth's pressurized atmosphere is contained within the infinitude of the space vacuum beyond the Kármán line, and the teacher responded with something along the lines of,
"Well, you're being a smartass, and you just don't understand how the gradient of pressure works. Basically, you're too young, too inexperienced to understand how gravity can behave as an airtight barrier, which allows the pressurized area in the sky to somehow refuse to expand infinitely into the vacuum of space."
And, since I was still being honest with myself, I remember the time many years before that, when I was just old enough to talk in complete sentences, my dad called me into the living room to show me something very important. Keep in mind, I was really young, as I learned how to read and write quite fluently by the time I was 3 or 4 years old. So I was about that old when he showed me this very important thing that he wanted to show me in the living room. So my dad showed me the little plastic spinning earth globe that he had on the countertop. He went on to explain to me that All of us live on a giant spinning ball, just like the one he was showing me on the countertop. And I remember this plain as day, very vividly. I remember my first question was, so what, do you mean we all like live on the top? And so he explained to me that no, we live, stuck to the sides of the ball as it's spinning around like this. And I even remember as a little 3 or 4-year-old being totally incredulous, telling my dad that it couldn't be like that because, well, simply you cannot walk around on the sides of anything, especially not something that's spinning. So, from the mouths of babes, right? The ultimate response from my dad involved the fact that, well, I was too young, too inexperienced, too stupid to understand how gravity and the spinning ball Earth worked. But I would definitely understand it all one day when I get old enough and wise enough to understand it, right?
What is gravity?
You have no idea. Okay, next question.
What is gravity?
You have no idea. Okay, next question.
What is gravity?
You have no idea. You have no idea. Okay, next question.
This is called gravity. That's what I do. I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, bitch. That's what I do. I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, bitch. That's what I do. I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, bitch.
What is gravity?
You have no idea. Okay, next question.
This is called gravity.
We can describe gravity. We can say what it does to other things.
This is called gravity.
But even as a 3 or 4-year-old, I saw some logical problems with the ball Earth theory even then. But obviously, I wasn't in any sort of position to argue with my dad or even later on argue with my teachers or the authority of the religion of scientism as a whole, along with all the brightest minds of science, living and dead. Who the hell am I to question people like Einstein or Copernicus or Carl Sagan or Cavendish, right? And once I realized that I had always held certain unsatisfied reservations about the heliocentric or standard theory of the universe, it was then like the floodgates opened. There are a ton of these sorts of examples which I've been aware of and known all along, but it was impossible for me to consider the preposterous notion that the world might actually be flat, which triggered a gift from God. The keys to revelation, if you will. And what is that gift? Well, it's the ability and wherewithal to apply our inherent, God-given, rational discernment towards our existing belief systems, long-held core belief systems, starting with, but certainly not limited to, the spinning ball Earth, which only exists in the imaginations of people, but certainly has nothing to do with objective reality. Another one of these examples of a big problem, which I had been storing on that mental shelf labeled queer curious, was the constant nature of the constellations. This honestly never sat well with me, and I could never wrap my globe-tarded brain around the fact that the constellations have never changed. Otherwise stated, the stars never changed their relative positions to one another, ever, all throughout known history since the beginning of civilization, whenever the familiar astronomical charts were created. The zodiac signs, the constellations. They're constant. They haven't changed in all of history. Allegedly, these were ascribed by the ancient Greeks many thousands of years ago. You see, I fully believed in the idea that the sun was traveling around the galaxy, just like all the other stars in the galaxy, while the galaxy is also hauling ass through space as a central hub of all the stars within its gravitational influence. This means that all the visible stars in the night sky are in mind-boggling curvilinear motions around a common center, wherein the stars are supposed to range in distance from our eye by many orders of magnitude, right? So they say some stars may be a couple of light years away and others may be thousands or hundreds of light years away. Of course, I believed that the galaxy was unimaginably vast and the universe practically infinite beyond that. So the solar velocities involved are relatively minimal in the grand scheme of things, hypothetically, but it still bothered me that not one single iota of astral parallax has ever been observed throughout history. And what I mean by astral parallax is the changing of relative positions of stars to one another due to everything moving through space constantly around in circuits, and the galaxy being in motion as well. It bothered me that none of this astral parallax has ever been observed. The constellations have indeed remained constant throughout all of history, and furthermore, the visible stars behave as precision clockwork, which transcribe perfectly predictable repeating cycles. Of course, throughout my life, I've never tried to debunk the ball Earth theory or the Copernican principle. It's just something that we've believed since we were little kids, and it's one of our core values that all of science agrees with, and so it's something that's beyond the forces of inquiry, right? So that was also kept on the shelf in my mind, labeled something like unassailable axiom or objective definite truth when it came to these issues we were having with the ball. Yeah, these issues exist, but it's still a ball flying around in space no matter what, right? For another example of how, if you're being honest with yourself, the heliocentric model certainly has problems which certainly cannot be rectified or logically explained by the model. Let's go back again to my first airline flight when I was about 10 years old. I flew from Florida to Texas and back and was going to visit my aunt in Dallas and then drive up to the Red River on the Texas and Oklahoma border for a 100+ mile canoeing shuttle run. I was super excited to get away from my crazy family and out on the water with my aunt, who I'd always been very fond of. Long story short, while I was on that flight leaving Florida, my first plane ride ever, I eventually got bored with the thrill of being 30,000 feet high, and so I closed the shutter on my window and started looking at the plane tickets that I had in my luggage. I wanted to see how much longer the flight home was going to be because, the flight from Florida to Texas was already taking a long time to a 10-year-old. So I was dreading flying against the spin of the earth, racing against Florida to get home after the trip. And I figured it would surely take at least twice as long to get home as it did for the flight from Florida to Texas. And honestly, I was quite shocked to realize that the return flight was scheduled to be identical in terms of duration to the original flight. While this was a bit of a relief, as I knew the return flight wasn't going to be like 10 hours long or something, I double-checked that I wasn't making some sort of a mistake in my math since, we are crossing over a time zone. Maybe the return flight was actually longer. I was just converting the time wrong or something. But no, indeed, the two flights were planned to be identical in duration. I was so excited. I was beaming. I couldn't wait to tell my aunt that I had just figured out that the Earth isn't spinning. Couldn't be, because the flight to Texas should be way shorter than the flight home back to Florida. And we can go ahead and evoke the two friends on a football field analogy, right? So if you and a friend are standing on opposite ends of a football field, one in either end zone, and you begin walking towards each other, you'll expect to meet somewhere around the 50-yard line, right? But if you do this exercise over, so you and a friend are standing on opposite ends of the football field, one in each end zone, and your friend begins running away from you, like opposite you, away from the 50-yard line, and you start walking towards the 50-yard line as you did, you would simply never expect to meet your friend somewhere around the 50-yard line as you did in the original example. It would never happen. Yet, that's practically what's supposedly going on with these two flights. In the example of the flight from Florida to Texas, you've got the plane racing towards Texas and Texas racing towards the plane where they should meet somewhere in the middle. And on the other hand, you have the return flight racing against the destination. And so you would expect the eastbound flight home back to Florida to be a much longer duration flight due to the fact that, objects traveling towards one another will always meet in the middle somewhere, whereas objects racing against one another certainly will not. And so this big piece of data, the often identical flight durations of eastbound and westbound flights, is a big piece of evidence against the globe. And even though I recognize this as a 9 or 10-year-old, it certainly never occurred to me, well, it did for an instant, that this is proof that the Earth isn't spinning. And, basically my high spirits were shot down very quickly and sort of cruelly by my aunt. And I never talked about it again, never thought about it again. I may have mentioned it to my dad, who basically shot it down as well, but basically they told me I was too young, too inexperienced, and really too stupid to understand how the spinning ball Earth works and how certain immutable laws of physics logically allow for basic and obvious rules of nature to simply not apply to the spinning ball Earth when it's convenient for the theory. Are we seeing a pattern here yet? Honestly, I could go on for days with lots of different examples, isolated problems with the standard ball Earth theory, which simply cannot be rectified or cogently explained by the model. But I think the above 3 or 4 examples are sufficient to drive the point home. Again, the constellations being constant throughout history, the cyclical clockwork nature of the heavens, the problem with airline flight durations, and the barometric pressure conundrum with the Kármán line in infinite space with no solid barrier separating the two. Again, these are problems which I was personally aware of since I was just a little kid, fully imbued with the notion that the Earth is a spinning ball in space. While I was aware of the problems, never in a million years would I actually try to debunk the ball Earth. I mean, who am I to question science, right? Even though, by the way, science involves asking a lot of questions. So when we run into characters or personalities online who take the position that the heliocentric model works perfectly, doesn't have any problems, and I'm just too young or dumb or inexperienced to get it, I really have to question that person's sincerity. Okay, so I totally understand the psychological barriers which prevent us from skeptically analyzing our core beliefs, which we've held for as long as we can remember. It's a sort of defense mechanism. You can't just go changing your core beliefs all willy-nilly, right? It's difficult for a person to go down the path of actually holding the ball Earth's feet to the fire, as it were. This is why I submit it's simply not possible to convince a person that the Earth is flat during the first conversation about it. Really, it's not even possible to get that person to skeptically analyze their core beliefs in a single sitting. This is a very deeply rooted problem, and it's not by accident. It's very intentionally, deliberately, and even maybe demonically instilled into our psyches at a very young age. There's a reason, in my opinion, that many of us in America are taught the bullshittery that goes along with Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, which are very similar to the globe, by the way. Such illogical fantasies are obviously lies. Even to the toddler who believes them, they don't really add up, but we have no reason to suspect that our parents and teachers would be lying to us about something like that, would they? The lore around Santa and the Easter Bunny are so totally illogical and unbelievable that when our parents finally do tell us the truth, I mean, it certainly hurts our feelings, and it is a shock and a traumatic experience to destroy our core belief systems, but it does certainly make a lot of sense that a single jolly boomer flies around on reindeer and goes down every single chimney in the Christian world with presents that we asked for. You know, it's not very logical. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And even though we believed it since we were little kids, it's almost a relief when we understand the truth about that. So even though we may have believed it, and it's a shock when we learn that our parents were in fact bald-faced lying to us for years, the trauma that we experience when severing our steadfast belief in a fantasy, like our faith in the supernatural, that doesn't just go away. And I believe that the same neural pathways which we used to place in the Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny are then supplanted into the fantasy right next door, the obviously illogical, totally unbelievable fantasy, of course. But the spinning ball Earth fantasy becomes surrogate mother for our recently traumatized minds, which actually needs some degree of faith to be healthy and connected to the Creator. So there is a place for belief in supernatural things, but maybe not Santa Claus, maybe not the Easter Bunny, and certainly not the globe. In other words, I do believe there are things out there beyond the scope of human understanding, and it's good to have faith in those things, but we should be very careful we're replacing our faith, right? And of course, if our faith is misplaced onto, say, a foundation of sand instead of a foundation of stone, then that is a serious problem which can only be rectified one way, and that is by hearing and understanding the truth and embracing the truth and really sharing that truth with others. Because, if a person hears the truth but doesn't understand it, they don't have the truth. If they hear the truth, understand it, but then fail to speak it, then the truth will ultimately die with them. It is only when a person hears the truth, embraces the truth, and shares it with others that they're planting seeds of truth into the future, right? So I think it's worth mentioning that it's no mistake that the birthday and resurrection of Yeshua ben Yosef are filled with these lies involving Santa and the Easter Bunny. Yeshua once said something along the lines of, anyone who intentionally misleads a child will suffer the wrath of the Creator, and they'd be better off tying a millstone to their neck and casting themselves into the sea. It's really no surprise then, is it, that the modern religion of Christianity, in my opinion, the modern synagogue of Satan, would implant utter lies into the traditions surrounding Yeshua ben Yosef, which subconsciously sap the credibility of anything _ Christian from the perspective of the child who just had Christmas taken away from them during a rather traumatic, unexpected paradigm shift, which happens to leave the child traumatized and vulnerable to an increased faith in the fantasy next door, again, the Copernican universe, which I believe inhabits similar synapses or similar neuropathways to Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. It really does. It's that incredible. And by incredible, I don't mean awesome. I mean not credible as in unbelievable, right? So if we continue being honest with ourselves, then we must admit that not everyone in the world holds the same interests or values. And indeed, most people in the world could care less about science or NASA or philosophy in general. Indeed, while I was personally very interested in science, I think I asked for a chemistry set every time I had a birthday and every Christmas, most people could honestly care less about Carl Sagan's cosmos and things of that nature. Oh, sure, they'll tell you that they live stuck to the side of a spinning ball, perpendicular to the axis, and they'll adamantly tell you that you're fucking crazy if you think the world is flat and stationary. But when it comes to understanding the ball Earth theory or being introspective enough to determine whether they're even being honest with themselves or whether they've actually thought this whole thing through properly, not so much. It's not exactly a strong point for most people. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. In just the past few months, I've actually encountered 3 different people who busted out the exact same argument when faced with the prospect of flat Earth. So I'll be trying to explain the basic concepts behind flat Earth to them, and we'll get on the topic of the Earth's alleged axial rotation, which they won't know how fast they think they're spinning, but they do know they're spinning. But again, 3 different people on 3 different occasions all seem to think that gravity, what goes up must come down, was directly resultant from the Earth's spin. That's right, the centrifugal force of the Earth spinning 1,000 miles an hour at the equator is what they have surmised throughout their entire adult life is the cause of gravity, proving to me with flying fucking colors that these people have certainly not thought this through whatsoever. It isn't that they're just failing to be honest with themselves and thus ignoring the problems inherent with the ball earth that any honest ball earther should admit are at least raising an eyebrow for them. No, it's that they've just never thought about this beyond what they potentially surmised when they were first introduced to ball earth as a little toddler. You know, the earth spins and that causes gravity, even though we're talking about opposite effects here, right? Gravity is the force or the not force that's supposedly countering the outward thrust generated by an object spinning. You know, evoking the gravitron at the fair analogy, which I've put in several videos. I won't evoke that again. But this is really scary stuff, because I can safely assert that the trauma involved with all authority figures in their life, convincing them of an obviously illogical and impossible fantasy akin to Santa Claus, the globe, this trauma has left many people in a malleable state of confusion, perfectly primed for mind control. If you even cursorily study subliminal suggestions, predictive programming, and generally mind control, or PR, you'll find, or advertising, right? You'll find that in order to lead an unwitting victim by the nose using subliminals, it's imperative that you first confound their core belief systems. Once you do that, you can convince them of pretty much anything. You can certainly convince a toddler that they live, stuck to the side of a spinning ball, perpendicular to the axis, maybe with some fight from the toddler, but you'd have a tough time convincing such things to an adult, which is why I believe, or I know, that they get us so young with the globe. This is also why they convince us, in my opinion, of the Tooth Fairy or the Easter Bunny, so that we're already prone to believing in clearly illogical fantasies, fantasies associated with all the warm and fuzzies that come along with Christmas morning, and then traumatically remove those beliefs, which only enhances our belief in the spinning ball Earth, which utilizes many of the same neural pathways that are left abandoned, leaving a hole in our heart the size and shape of Santa Claus, right? And indeed, the ball Earth belief system seems to fill that Santa-shaped hole very nicely and becomes practically impossible to shake off once it's set in completely. We should be very grateful, as we are very lucky indeed, to live during an era where we have the opportunity to wake up from such a insidious mind control campaign, which has plagued at least several generations of people going back in history. Thank God that we live in the days of revelation, really. I'm going to give a final quick story. This is something that I've never shared with anyone because I only sort of rediscovered it in the recesses of my own mind rather recently. It's something that I've thought about for quite some time. I just mentioned that many generations of our ancestors have lived and died believing in the fallacy of a spinning ball Earth, and really, my grandparents both passed away right after the turn of the 2000th century. I think my grandfather passed, it was New Year's Eve, December 31st of, I want to say, 2001, may have been later, and then my grandmother didn't live much longer after that. And for this whole time that I've been into Flat Earth, I've kind of been sort of upset, or it's a depressing thought to think that my grandparents had lived and died just like everyone else throughout history, believing that they lived on a ball Earth. But, I remembered something in clear, vivid detail recently, like within the last couple of months, and I think I've told one person about this, so let me share this with you. When I was I might have been about 11 years old, maybe younger, my parents were having trouble with my brother, so they sent me alone to go spend a week with my grandfather, which is something I'd never done before. We either went to my grandparents as a family, or there were a few times when my brother and I stayed with my grandparents for like a weekend or something. But I had never, spent an entire week with Papu and Yaya by myself. And during that time, this is so crazy, but my grandfather showed me a slideshow of when he was during World War II they were building pontoon bridges and destroying the infrastructure to prevent the Nazis from crossing rivers and stuff like that. The Army Corps of Engineers was also sending up high altitude weather balloons that acted as basically spy satellites, right? So they had signal repeaters, or they were getting radio triangulation data from arrays of high altitude weather balloons. And by golly, I promise you, my grandfather told me that he knew the Earth was flat. So this isn't something like, David Weiss had put up a video of, I think, the elderly woman named Ruth, who attested that she was taught in school about flat Earth. But Papu, my grandfather, that wasn't his story at all. I mean, he grew up going to school believing that the Earth was a ball, but during his time with the Army Corps of Engineers, he actually started off in the Army Air Force or whatever, and then switched to the Army Corps of Engineers. But at any rate, he told me with no holds barred, straight up, that he doesn't give a damn what NASA said. He doesn't give a damn what my dad told me, that I better believe it and better remember that the Earth is flat. It's not a spinning ball. And I remember being incredulous with him and telling him, no, my dad and all the school teachers assure me that we live on a spinning ball. And he said he didn't give a damn about that. Now, the one thing that I have remembered about this week that I spent with my grandfather, and specifically, he loved doing slideshows, but specifically that slideshow, was the high altitude weather balloons that they sent up. And he had a bunch of really cool slides and high altitude shots of the horizon and stuff like that from back in the 1940s or whatever. But what I had retained from that were the high altitude weather balloons, which is something that has stuck with me as a flat earther because, that's what satellites are supposedly achieving, is like the GPS infrastructure, the signal repeating, the worldwide communications. So I've known because of that slideshow that satellites were totally unnecessary and irrelevant and, according to what they say they're doing thousands of miles away, useless, right? But so, yeah, this is something that hit me like a ton of bricks recently that and you got to remember, my grandfather was a career military man. He did like 25 years with the Army, retired as a lieutenant colonel, and he had political differences with Vietnam, so he ended up saying hell with that and got out. Then he went on to work with HUD as the chief engineer for Department of Housing and Urban Development for another 25 years and retired from there. But him and his engineer buddies, these are very smart people with all the best high-tech equipment, figured it out. They realized that the Earth isn't a spinning ball, but they were also bound by oaths and bound by debriefings and basically under the gun. I think he may have taken some sort of Masonic oaths. Again, he was high up with HEPA, which from what I gather, I don't know much about it, but it's some kind of similar Masonic secret society or whatever. He couldn't tell no one. He couldn't go public with this. Otherwise, they would kill him or whatever, but he did tell me. And I remember, I was pretty young. I really don't remember how old I was, but it was important to him that he at least told somebody because the dude had a conscience, right? I mean, it must be really hard for a lot of these guys that do know the truth to lie to everyone. But, if they're getting payoffs or if they're getting threats and you're bound by oath, right, what can you do? So there's that. I think that this is something that's really a positive thing for me and maybe not so much because even to this day, there's a lot of people, I know of several very successful celebrity level people that are flat earthers, but they just won't go public with it because they're afraid that it's going to ruin their careers. Honestly, from where I'm sitting now, part of me wishes that I never would have gone public with flat earth because, good luck getting a loan or a job or an apartment with my name, right? If you Google search my name, it's synonymous with flat earth and most people just ain't having that shit, man. So, I can't say that I blame them, but I would call to action Anybody that has influence, people that have monetary resources, it's not like you're going to be on the street if you lose your job, and even celebrities that are afraid to come forward with flat Earth, you have to stand up for what is right, man. You have to pick a side here. You can either be with the deceivers or you can be with the truthers. The truth's gonna win. Whether it happens in our lifetimes or not, I don't know. But you have to stand up for what's right. And I can attest, I can't prove it to you, but the Most High will bless you and back you if you stand up for what you know to be right, even though it'll probably get you in trouble for it or hurt or worse. That's what we have to do. Okay. As vocal proponents for the truth about flat Earth, we come into contact with a lot of people who instantly think we're stupid, gullible, and crazy without any credibility. This is understandable, as, again, the belief in a spinning ball Earth is such a pervasive and strong delusion, wherein the concept of a static planar Earth is simply inconceivable and incompatible with our core beliefs and our overarching paradigm as well. All I can say is if you're like me and you've been trying to get your friends or family on board with this very important revelation about the Great Deception, don't lose heart. Because I know it can be disheartening when your friends and family essentially disown you and alienate you due to your newfound understanding. I get it, it's tough. But just remember, you're never going to convince anyone that the world is flat and motionless in a single sitting. Maybe not even in a single year. And certain people you may never convince. They would have to do it on their own should they choose to go down that road, but you can't force them. It's important to remember we were all there once, and it does take time, it takes prayer, and personal commitment to strive towards objective truth, with objective truth as the only goal, and shameless, honest introspection to even begin questioning these long-held core beliefs surrounding the ball Earth and the infinite space theory and the Copernican principle. Don't get discouraged. Yeshua ben Yosef prophesied that during the times of revelation, most people will have eyes but can't see and ears but can't hear. There's a true prophecy for you. The best we can try to do is plant the seed of truth in their minds and pray for them to at least knock on the door at the threshold of truth. Of course, any and all who knock are granted entry, but it's a personal choice that we each must make. But you have to pick a side. You can't ride the fence on this forever, especially if you have influence in this world. And, it makes you wonder if some of these suicided celebrities weren't coming out as flat earthers until right up to the point where they were killed. I don't know. It would make sense to me. But, continue believing in the Santa Globe along the wide and well-trodden path with the broad and obvious gate. Go ahead, do that if you will. Or you can begin seeking out the hidden, narrow, and virgin path, which leads to new understandings, as well as angst and alienation from our family and friends. It comes with the territory. He told us to be exceedingly glad when people hate you and curse you and say all kinds of evil, nasty things about you just for standing up for the truth. For then you will know that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And I'll tell you, I can't wait. One thing I'm not afraid of is death, because this world ain't got much left for me anyway, man, honestly. I'm tired of it. Now, while I can't prove much of this to you, sure, you can prove flat earth, but when it comes to spiritual things like standing up for the truth and being blessed by the Most High, I can't prove that to you, but I can attest to the fact that if you do indeed stand up for what you know to be right, even though doing so will probably lead to suffering, pain, or even death, the Most High, the creator of all things, will back you up and bless you and give you the strength needed to participate in these amazing days of revelation and redemption. Beyond the fact that the standard heliocentric model has all kinds of inconsistencies and contradictions, which many of us, at least those of us who are honest with ourselves, will have been aware of for a long time. The world is quite simply, demonstrably, flat and motionless. The globe Earth has problems in theory and in practice and in basic measurement. It's got problems because it's a lie. It's not true. Even pontificates of scientism will admit that the world is a fixed frame of reference, And I'm sorry, folks, but you can't have a spinning ball flying around in 5 directions at once along curved paths behave as a fixed frame of reference for little observers somehow walking around on the sides of that spinning ball perpendicular to its axis of rotation. I mean, it is a whopper, but as they say, the bigger the lie, the more people will believe it, especially if you repeat it loudly enough across all elements of media. At the end of the day, flat Earth is obvious, simple, demonstrable, repeatable, falsifiable, and sensible. The only reason that we have such a hard time sharing this truth is due to our ass-backwards culture, which is built upon a deception so insidious, it really is a miracle we've come as far as we have in terms of simple awareness of the deception. Step 1 in solving this problem is helping other people become aware of it, and it's a toughie. It's a real motherfucker. It is. But we have to try, otherwise we're doomed. We live in a culture that estimates a person's worth in direct proportion with their bank account. So someone sees a person like me, yet again, practically homeless, living out of a hotel, and they'll point and laugh and say, well, you can't trust this guy. He can't afford to take care of his family. So how can you listen to anything he says, right? Trust me, I wish I had a mansion, a professional studio, and an Armani tailor to dress me every day. But unfortunately, that's not in the cards for me just yet. Maybe in the future, but not just yet. On the other hand, so according to that logic, you're going to trust the lying Freemasons at NASA because they've got plenty of money. They can afford to feed and take care of their families. So clearly they're credible, and they've got very nice suits on as well. Frankly, the truth is not reliant upon the messenger, right? So whether I'm a trust fundee with an Ivy League degree or whether I'm just me doing the best that I can, the truth isn't affected by that. So hopefully, at least we can try to look past the messenger and just focus on the message. If you take the time to skeptically analyze your core beliefs that you've held since you were a little kid, I can assure you that you'll find there is truth here, and it is not a waste of time. And in fact, it's one of the most important things you'll ever do. So with that, I'm going to wrap this one up, guys. I hope that you enjoyed it. Please consider supporting our channel efforts. I'll put links in the description. You can do it through Cash App, PayPal, Patreon, Venmo. The more guile is the key word on all of those should you choose to help us out. We damn sure could use your help. I've got some opportunities cooking right now, so hopefully this will be a quick one, but honestly, if a check doesn't come by Monday that I'm expecting, I'm going to be literally on the streets without even a hotel room. So if nothing else, send a prayer up for us because we damn sure need it. Anyway, one love, you guys. Thanks so much for watching. As always, spread the word, spread the world, and peace out, everybody. We'll see you in the next one. A new chapter of the audiobook, Confusion in the Cosmos, coming up shortly. God bless you guys. Talk to you soon.